Hey everybody, it's Mitch, and welcome! Today we have got a different video for you because, well, I was watching a video about a year back and I realized that MatPat, host of Game Theory, was wrong. Now, no offense to MatPat, he's a great guy, but he messed up. As someone who's just spent the last 4 years of his life studying to be an electrical engineer, when I saw his video on Pikachu and electric type Pokemon and why they aren't any good, I had some concerns because there was one very, very large flaw that he made. A lot of the video was fairly decent, and to MatPat's credit, I mean, I know his background is in computer science, and I went to school with a lot of computer science guys. They all had to take circuits with me, so I suspect MatPat was probably in Circuits 1. He probably took that course. He probably did well. I don't blame him. But a knowledge of Circuits 1 ain't going to get you what you need for this, unfortunately. So let's get into exactly where he messed up. All right, so I got a little PowerPoint for you. So basically, MatPat is looking at Ohm's Law, where I equals V over R. And he's like, yeah, so we're looking at the resistance of the air, and that's how we're going to start calculating things and determining whether or not electric type Pokemon are any good. However, this really only applies to conductors. When you start looking at insulators, which is what air is, and MatPat agrees with that. However, and he mentioned that in his video. However, he didn't quite understand the difference between a conductor and an insulator. What MatPat seems to think, and this is a common misconception, I used to think this too, is that the difference between a conductor and an insulator is that conductors have low resistance and insulators have high resistance. That's just not the case, though. That's not how it works. The difference between a conductor and an insulator is that conductors have a very low breakdown voltage. The amount of voltage it takes to get across them is next to zero. Whereas with insulators and semiconductors as well, although semiconductors are a weird thing, which I'm not going to quite get into, although the same logic applies. Basically, what that does is they have a certain amount of voltage that you have to overcome just to move anything at all. So basically, the real formula, and this isn't even the true proper 100% formula here. So I equals voltage minus the breakdown voltage of the thing you're going through in quantity divided by the resistance. That's going to be more or less the correct formula. Now, in actuality, you have this really complex IV curve where voltage and current, it starts out slow and then it starts going up. You'll start seeing that as you first apply have a higher voltage, you're going to see very, very little current. Then all of a sudden it just starts spiking to be a lot more. That's going to be what you're really going to see. It's a nice curve. This formula here is going to show it's going to show flat and then suddenly a spike, which is close. Unless you're dealing with points right around the breakdown voltage, it really doesn't matter. The difference between what you're going to get with this and what you're going to get with the actual formula is very small, and unless you really need a high degree of accuracy, which we don't here, we're just trying to figure out if this is effective or not, then this is going to be good enough. And this is what electrical engineers, are going to use most of the time, unless they realize we actually need a high degree of accuracy. It's super important. Therefore, we're going to use the more complicated formula. But more often than not, you're going to see electrical engineers using this formula right here. And as I say, for conductors, the breakdown voltage is next to zero. So you don't have to worry about that too much. So yeah. Now, that's basically one of his major, major flaws there was, well, his problem with not understanding how insulators work. Now, and to his credit, I used to think that when I had taken Circuits 1, when I had gotten through that, that's what I believed too. It wasn't until I got into, more advanced electrical engineering courses that I realized, oh, no, that's not the case. But yeah, I believed that too for a long time. The actual resistance of the air is actually really low. It just has a really high breakdown voltage, which, interestingly enough, MatPat mentioned in his video, more or less. His numbers were a little off. So he was saying that for 100,000 volts, which is what the Pokedex entry for Raichu says, would get you about 3.3 centimeters. Well, I found some numbers, and the numbers I found said that that would be able to get you a distance of about 4.739 centimeters, or about 4.74. There's probably too many sig figs that I wrote down. But anyways, so a little bit more, but it's still small. So instead of 1.5 inches, we're looking at almost 2 inches. Still not a lot. I mean, it's still, it's not going very far. It's nowhere near the several feet that it's needing to go for this. So his ultimate conclusion on it not being effective, probably right. However, at least if assuming that we're sticking with just 100,000 volts. Now, the thing about electricity is voltage isn't just something you store like that. It's a potential difference, as he mentioned, but it's not the power. The power is power, which is current times voltage. That's the real unit that's being stored. So how much energy he has stored, how much electricity an electric type Pokemon would have stored up isn't voltages. It's watts, which is volt amps, sort of. My powers professor would kill me for saying that. It's voltage times amps, but there is very much a difference between a volt amp and a watt when you start getting into imaginary power. But that's not really for here right now. But I know my powers professor would have issue with that. He corrected me on that in the first day of class, pretty heavy. So yeah, but yes, so it's not really that. So it's voltage times amps that are going to be your actual units. So when he charges up the attack, he's basically releasing it. Now, another major issue I have with his video is he's talking about how electric type Pokemon are storing negative charges in their cheeks. Not really. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it's stored in their cheeks. Okay, that makes sense. You see, that's where the sparks come from. But to say that this just has a negative charge there is just crazy. He gave the example of the battery and how it had positive and negative charges on it. But then he completely disregarded the fact that the electric Pokemon might be storing positive charges somewhere. What? A positive charge is a very real thing. It's something that's known in electrical engineering as a hole. That is the term that is typically given, is a hole. And it's a very real thing. Basically, electrons, when we're talking about them, is basically ions. We're talking about a substance it's not even, actually generally it's not even ionized. It actually gets way more, it can be ionized in terms of lightning it typically is, but sometimes it's not even ions. It's, just the way things are set up. It tends to have more free electrons, and some tend to have fewer free electrons. It's very complicated, but yes, it is very, very possible to have a positive charge. And for most Pokemon, I would say it's almost certainly possible. The only exception to this, I would say, would be Minun, where, of course, Plusle almost certainly has positive charges stored in him. Like, that's his whole gimmick, is he's a positively charged Pokemon. Like, that's the whole gimmick between those two. So someone who's an avid Pokemon fan and, someone who has a degree in electrical engineering, I have some issues with this whole thing. So he keeps claiming that they would just be shocking themselves. No. it's very, very possible to store electricity. I mean, just look at a battery. I have some behind me, but I don't want to ruin the shot by going to grab it. If you just look at a battery, you will see that they have their positive charge on one end and their negative charge on the other end. But it's not just shocking itself all the time. I mean, if you run a wire across it, yeah, it's going to blow up. But don't try that, by the way. Definitely do not try that. Very dangerous. Yeah, if you do that, it will. But when it's just sitting there, it's not doing anything. Why? Well, because there's a high amount of resistance and other things, mostly resistance inside the battery that makes it so that that no current's flowing through it. It's just very, very high resistance materials that prevent current from just flowing internally inside the battery. That's really how it works. More or less. It's actually more complicated than that. But it's very, very possible that an electric type Pokemon, most at the very least, would have a negative charge somewhere and a positive charge somewhere else. And that they would have some way of storing them efficiently and some mechanism for releasing that charge. You see this a lot with biological creatures. And they would likely also have high internal body resistance, which would make them less vulnerable to it, which makes sense. Electric type Pokemon take half damage from electric type attacks from other Pokemon. So it makes sense that they would have high body resistance, as well as probably some other mechanisms like extra high resistance around the part of their body that they're storing their electricity. Like with Pikachu and Raichu, their cheeks, because that's where they store them. So that would be, so that's how that works. Now, in terms of, so I don't see them shocking themselves like MatPat claims. Like, clearly these creatures have some sort of, biological defense mechanism to prevent this from happening. Where, and honestly, the way I see the electric types attack is they actually discharge the negative charge into the air in a way so that it retracts back to the positive charge, completing the circuit. Because that's a really, really big thing for electricity. Now, when you're looking at static electricity like lightning and various other things, you don't need it. But if you want to actually have a circuit going on that's actually going to do something, you need to complete the circuit. You need to basically go around. You need to start at one point, go back to the other point, which is why with a battery you would take a wire and move it to some sort of whatever it's powering, and then you take another wire and you lead it back to the other end of the battery. You can't just leave it hanging open like that. It won't work that way. You need to have that continuous flow for pretty much any electricity other than static, which you really don't see anything other than like lightning strikes or when you get a static shock, various things like that. You guys know what static electricity is. So there's that. Yeah, so that's basically what we're talking about here with the electric type Pokemon. Now, could it be feasible for them to go farther than this, 4 almost like 5 centimeters? Yeah, they could. So the way air works and its breakdown voltage is it's not just some flat fixed number. Things can vary based on a number of different factors. If there happens to be high precipitation, that number will go down. Like if you're in a really moist area, that you'll see a lot lower breakdown voltage. If it's in a drier area, the breakdown voltage will be much higher. Like his 1.3 billion volts that he would say would be required for lightning strikes sometimes. That's a high-end estimate for one, and so that would be in a very dry climate, someplace that it really takes a lot, which is why you tend to see lightning more often in the rain, because when it rains, the breakdown voltage of the air goes down, and it's easier to conduct electricity. Not only that, but water conducts electricity, and it can just kind of travel along the water droplets until it finds a path, ionizing some of it, which then it doesn't have to conduct across the whole thing. So it just makes things a lot easier overall, which is something that could potentially be done if the electric Pokemon had some way of making a path to their opponent. Maybe shooting some sort of water or liquid at them, even just a tiny drop, even for just a second. The electricity could travel along that path and then travel back to their other cheek, because potentially one cheek's positively charged, the other's negatively charged, which is something for some reason MatPat never thought about. I don't know why he didn't think about that, because it makes a lot of sense for one cheek to be positive and the other to be negative. For them both to be, for him to assume them they were both negative is a really rookie mistake right there. Even for somebody who's only taken circuits one, at least assumedly. I don't know exactly what he's taken, but based on everything I know, I've read about the guy and what I've seen in his video, it seems that that's probably what he's done. Like, I suspect this is one that MatPat himself researched, that he did not outsource that at all. So yeah, I think that there is a way for a path to be conducted. Is it probable? It's pushing things a little bit. So overall, I think his conclusion that it would be very difficult for them to actually be effective unless they were like getting up close and personal. I don't think he'd need to actually get to the point of like biting into them, and they'd actually need to get to the point of actually biting into them and getting through their flesh, because quite frankly, 10,000 volt, 100,000 volts, that's 10 times the voltage of the electric chair. So I'm pretty sure, if 10,000 volts can kill a person and with a fair amount of overkill to try and make it as humane as possible. To try and make it as humane as possible, 100,000 volts will fry someone. No question. Don't need to be tearing. Don't need to be biting into them. 100,000 volts, more than enough. More than enough. So you don't really need that. It's also quite possible that perhaps the electric type Pokemon moves in close, starts the electric attack, and then moves away. And as they do so, the lightning is already ionized and it can just continue flowing. That's very possible as well. So there's options. It's definitely more complex than what the games and the anime and everything make it seem to be, which MatPat does have a point on. But he's off on a number of things, like how insulators work, and just his conclusion that they'd shock themselves, because honestly that's ridiculous. There's no reason why they would shock themselves. I have every reason to believe that an electric type Pokemon would have measures to hold the electricity charges in place, and that when they release it, it would just go from one cheek to the other, discharging both. There's no reason to think that wouldn't be the case. The only possible exceptions would be Plusle and Minun. Those ones don't make the most sense in isolation. They do make a lot of sense together, and I kind of get it, but they don't make a lot of sense on their own. To have just a single charge like that is a little weird. It makes way more sense for a Pokemon to have a both positive charge in one part of their body, negative charge in the other part of their body, highly likely symmetrical, like Pikachu's two cheeks, one positive, one positive, one negative. Very likely that is the case there. So yeah, and they most likely have some sort of biological mechanisms to keep themselves from getting shocked. The fact that he claims that wouldn't happen is ridiculous. Now, if the Pokemon jumps in the air, as MatPat said, I guess it's possible, although at the same time it probably would just go from one cheek to the other doing nothing. But at the very least, it ain't going to shock him. He's not shocking himself. He's just sort of, but like in a non-harmful way. He's discharging the charges into each other. Like, it's nothing crazy. So yeah, that's my thoughts on MatPat's video. I know it's been a long time coming. He dropped that video back in November of 2019. Of course, I'm dropping this January 1st, 2021. A Happy New Year, by the way. So it's been a little while, but I was in school, still finishing up my degree. Trying to get through that those last couple semesters, of my senior year. So I had a little more important things to do at the time, and then COVID hit. So it is what it is. But anyways, if you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a like. Let me know what you think. Maybe if you enjoyed it, share it. Let MatPat see exactly why he's wrong, because I'm pretty small time. I don't know if he's ever going to see this. So anyways, as always, I'm Mitch, and I'll be seeing you